Athletes as activists is nothing new. Think Jackie Robinson, the first African American to play Major League Baseball in the modern era. A recently announced NFL policy seeks to stop players from kneeling during the national anthem. That act, players say, protests racial and social injustice. But the league and President Donald Trump have instead linked it to disrespect for this country. I discussed how we got here with Marty Dobrow, Springfield College professor of communication, and Bill Newman, director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Western Massachusetts.
To me, it's sort of a nationalism versus patriotism kind of question. I think nationalism, to me, I sort of regard as our country is better than your country, our people are better than your people, we can impose our will upon you. Usually a negative force in the world. I think patriotism, as I take it, I think this is a patriotic question, and I think that's really about having a commitment to, and I'll use these words very consciously, make America greater. That, to me, is really the crux of this, and that really.
And do you think that would be the crux if President Trump didn't use that phrase so often?
Well, that's not his phrase. His phrase is "Make America Great Again." I think there's a distinction. When I say "Make America Greater," what I'm talking about is a recommitment to sort of time-honored American ideals in our founding documents, we the people, being created equal, multicultural society, e pluribus unum sort of thing. That, to me, is really at the essence of patriotism. And I think it really begs the question, who are the patriots? You know, we are in New England, that's our team, right? The Patriots. So I think we should really ask that question, who are the real patriots? And some people might interpret that as people who serve in the military, and certainly some of those people have been incredibly patriotic. You know, police officers at times, I mean, people who uphold the rule of law, equal protection under the law, that can be high-level patriotism. But it's also true, I think, that historically our patriots have been people who have been committed to civil disobedience right from the founding of our nation. And that's what I think that we're really looking at in this case.
I think that there are some people who are looking at this, though, and saying this is an employer making a decision saying that they don't want their employees to do X, Y, or Z. What do you think?
Well, I think we have to look at how this entire protest began. And it began with Colin Kaepernick saying, I am protesting racism, and more specifically, I am protesting police brutality that is inflicted on communities of color. And that's what the protest is.
But there are so many people who didn't interpret it that way.
Oh, no,
and
no,
this has sort of gone off the rails in some sense.
Well, yeah, but I think that's Donald Trump, because Donald Trump reframed the protest. And he said, that's not what the protest is. The protest is about disrespect for the flag. And Colin Kaepernick said, no, that's not what the protest is. And that's not what the players said. And they said this is about protesting racism and specifically about police misconduct and police brutality in communities of color.
But why then do you think that so many people have gone along with the president's assertion that this is about something different?
Because well, wait a second. Patriotism, as Marty points out, has as a core value protest. And patriotism has as a core value equal protection of the law and all people being treated equally under the law. And so to protest the lack of equal protection, to use those First Amendment values to speak out and say, this is wrong, police brutality is wrong, infliction of pain and violence on communities of color because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity, that's wrong. What could be more patriotic than that?
And so then why do you think the owners have gone and taken this very firm stance saying, if you choose to do this, we're going to fine you?
Well, some owners, let's point out that at least one owner said, you have a right as a patriotic person.
Oh, sorry, I should have said the league, but you're right. Then when you get at the owner's level, it's different. But the league came out and said, this is the way it is.
Because the league is gutless. And the league came out and said, well, if the president tells us to do this, we are going to bow to the president.
And so what recourse do the players have at this point? I mean, we just have to wait until the fall and see how they react?
Well, I think that there is, I don't want to predict what the players would have.
You're an attorney, and do they have legal recourse? Could they in turn sue and say, no, this is not something that this is a violation of our rights?
Well, I think there is a labor law violation here. I think that the league and the owners have unilaterally, without negotiation, changed a working condition There was no negotiation, and I think that violates the obligations of any employer dealing with the union to negotiate with the union before there is a change of working conditions. So I do think that what the league did on as a matter of labor law is illegal. What the players will do on the big question of the right to protest and the right to make statements in the workplace, that's going to be a different question. And this came as a protest, a valid protest, an important protest, making important statements. And I hope the players find a way to exercise those First Amendment values and make their statements known and to not be cowed by the owners and the league, which in the league, by the way, I think was, as I said, gutless. President Trump says, do this, and they say, yes, sir.
So, Marty, for you, from a historical perspective, when you look at sports players using their platform to protest, this is not new, right?
It's not new, but it has certainly been revitalized and re-energized in kind of an unprecedented way, I think, in the last few years. I mean, you could certainly go back 50 years ago this year. I mean, we're looking back so much at 1968 this year, and that's among many other historical landmarks in the '68 Olympics. We had the two sprinters on the medal stand with their Black Power salute, and that was sort of a similar dynamic. I mean, they were really crucified by a lot of members of the country who were not honoring the sincerity of their protest. I mean, this was a year in which Martin Luther King had been assassinated. You can well understand why people of color would really feel disenfranchised during this year. In the years following that, for the most part, I think athletes were quiet. They became very well compensated. Famously, you had Charles Barkley saying, "I am not a role model" in a commercial.
And didn't Michael Jordan say Republicans buy sneakers too, something like that, when
Absolutely.
he was asked
Their
to stand up and make
interests, I think, became paramount, and that was unfortunate because they do have a great forum. And ultimately, I don't think that they get to say whether or not they are a role model. They are. They are in the public eye. And I think we have seen, in connection with a lot of recent current events over the last 3-4 years, athletes gaining a voice, and people like LeBron James in the NBA, certainly Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, beginning to speak out and use that voice. I think that's a really healthy dynamic, and I completely agree with Bill that I think that the owners really caved in this situation. It remains to be seen how the players will respond. But that again, that tradition, that strand of civil disobedience, of standing up when things are not right, I regard as something that is fundamentally patriotic. You look at someone like Martin Luther King, what greater patriot have we had? I mean, would we say that he was not patriotic because he was arrested, because he broke some laws? If those laws were that you're not supposed to order food in a whites-only establishment, to me, it's pretty clear.
Does some time, some distance change that lens of history? Because what do you remember of that moment of '68, right? It was, you said that it was...
You're just here to date us. That's what you wanted. That's what you're trying to do, Carrie, right?
If you were to recall what happened.
I do recall. Thanks,
So
Marty.
in that moment, now, do you think that history looks at that differently?
I think that history puts it in context, and I think makes it easier to see why that protest happened in the way it happened. And I think this conversation is important to put in context too, because these are football players. That's a very violent sport. And what their protest was saying, violence should not be on the streets. Violence should not be perpetrated against persons of color. Violence does not belong in American society, particularly when it is exercised illegally and improperly by authorities. And I think that that is at the core of American values and at the core of democracy, which is to protest against that which is improper and wrong and immoral and violent. And the players were saying that, and they should have the right to say that.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Bill Newman, Marty Dobrow, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.